Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne. This is Inside Exec. We're continuing with part 2 of our discussion with Dalmo Cirne, and this time we're going to look at management streams in particular. What's the source of the management stream, and how we need to set values, core values for our teams that are in line with the core values of an organisation.
To us, obviously, it sounds sensible. It sounds like this should be the natural progression for teams and for projects and all that sort of thing. Do you find that there is resistance to this approach?
That is a great question. Historically speaking, anytime a change is introduced, it will disrupt the status quo. There will be people who benefit from the way things operate, and even the organization itself is optimized to operate in a certain way. You introduce change, that change may find some resistance. There's a book I really enjoyed reading that, and I read the 50-year anniversary of the book, one of those that survived the test of time. And it's called Man, Machines, and Modern Times, from an author called Elton Morrison. And he talks about Navy officer from an American Navy officer and a British Navy officer. And they were talking about compensating the cannon of warships for the balance that the ship is having when navigating in waters, right? Because the water is not still, it's going up and down. By the time you aim one of the cannons and you shoot, the water has moved and you miss your mark, right? And the rate of misses were in the 90+%. And they discovered a way, okay, if we balance the cannon, we can improve that significantly. And they did. Long story short, there was so much resistance from the improvement that they suggested because the entire system of promoting officers in the Navy had to go through this process of artillery and how do you aim things, how do you load ammunition, and so on. It got to the point where the American officer got in contact with the president at the time, and the president was the one who overruled all the opinions, all the order from the Navy, and said, we have to do this and we have to implement that. So he had to escalate all the way to the president, and the president had to issue a top-down order to say, please do what this person here is telling you to do because it is best to do. Nowadays, many businesses have recognized that many times people join companies, but they leave managers. So leaders in general at the company, they play a fundamental role in growing the team, retention, motivation, keeping people engaged, and so on. If you don't train those managers, those leaders in a proper way, you're going to be doing a disservice to yourself as a company. You're going to be working against yourself. I don't think anyone in their right mind would do this. Eventually, you realize we have to invest in those people. We have to come up with modern techniques of management because we invest so much in training those people and they're building things together with us. We don't want to see them leave. So the moment you come to that realization, you start investing in what is best out there for leadership, for management, because you want to retain those people and you want those people to grow professionally. Right? Even if the people stay at your company, but their skills start become stale, you're also doing a disservice to yourself. You want people not only to stay, but to keep their skills sharp, because then you're always at the cutting edge.
That story triggers for my mind a question about how the disruptor up until, say, 18 months ago was obviously COVID. The next disruptor that we had in terms of business and business management is AI, which now becomes intrinsic into almost everything that we do or we use or how we manage. Does that become the catalyst for looking at management in a whole different way because it's so invasive, because it becomes part of every decision we make, essentially, in terms of another resource that we can use, or it's integrated into systems that we use, whatever else it is. Do we have to acknowledge it, that it is going to affect the way that we are managing and how we run our businesses? Or do we just accept that it's like the introduction of computers, it's just another thing that's going to happen that we use along the way?
I think you're correct, but I would complement what you said. It's not just AI. If we go back a little bit in time, there were other technologies that were disruptive. Comparing them to AI may not be fair right now because we are all still learning what is the potential of AI, how to use it properly, what is going to be the real change that is going to come from AI. So we are in the middle of it happening. But going back a little bit in time, we had the introduction of internet, we had the introduction of computers, we had the introduction of typewriters and pencils. That there was like a real concern that pencils and erasers would destroy calligraphy, right? The way I see it is because over time, we learn about the potential of technologies and we optimize ourselves to work with those technologies. Any new technology that comes, like the internet, like personal computers and so on, that disrupts what we were optimized to work with or our way to operate under those circumstances. Now we have to relearn, re-optimize ourselves to work with that new technology. So I think that is true for AI, but that was also true for the internet, that was also true for computers, is us going through this phase where what is this new technology? We have a choice of resistance or acceptance of the technology, and that's a choice each of us has to make. And how do we learn to optimize our new way of working with or without that technology, right? So I think what you said is true. I just wanted to offer a little bit more context around it and historically as well.
So more generally, in management terms, we're looking at what you're introducing as a new way of thinking about management. Are there concepts or standards or pillars of management that don't change, that haven't changed over the course of all of the research that you might have done or the things that you've seen?
Well, in management, there is the inevitable notion of hierarchy, right?
Yep.
And that's not a bad thing. It is a necessary thing because imagine an unpopular decision needs to be made. Let's pause a little bit over here and talk about consensus. One may make an argument of saying, we're going to get together, everyone on the team, every matter we're going to open to vote and we're going to search for consensus. One, it will be a very slow decision process. Two, any team after assembled, it would vote to preserve itself. That's going back to our initial point. Let's say an unpopular decision. We were talking about AI. There are some products that because of AI may not be needed anymore. If you were investing building one of those products, and now with the advent of AI, you no longer need, someone has to make that call of discontinuing that product, right? Or at least the investment in that product. If we put that to vote and seek for consensus, the vote, my guess is we have to continue investing that. We cannot discontinue because there will be consequences to people. That is one thing that never changed in management is that notion of hierarchy. But I would argue that it is necessary because there are conditions like this. There's also arbitration of different ways of proposing to build a product. Maybe it's not about discontinuing, but there are two very good ways of building a product. Some people on the team want to build in a certain way, some other people a different way. You do have to make a choice which way to go. And it cannot be a mix of the two. I'll tell you the reason why. options A and B, and you say, I like this from option A, and I like this from option B. I'm going to propose an option C, which is a mix of both. But by proposing option C, you manage to upset both A and B. Now there's no one supporting A, there's no one supporting B, and there's this new monstrosity that you create that is option C. Chances are it's going to be a failure. It's better to pick either option A or option B, implement that as the team is proposing, ask for the other faction to say, I understand your proposal, I like this aspect of it. Let's implement option B, for example. And I need you to be on board with me to do this. After option B is implemented, all is said and done, then you can introduce a suggestion and say, how about we try that particular point I liked from option A? Now it's no longer option C. We implemented option B. You validated that. Then you can try and see if that portion you like from option A is valid or not. Then you can validate or refute.
You worked in established companies as well as startups. In relation to what we're just talking about, did you find a stark difference between that leadership hierarchical style?
Yes. The short answer is yes. That comes to, we were talking in the beginning about the why, the what, the when, and the how. Let's focus a little bit on the when. You establish a process. Establishing a process would be the what, right? The process is a what. But you should only establish a process once you need to replicate things at scale. You reached a certain feature that you like on a product, or you need to build many widgets from either software or hardware or whatever you're manufacturing. In order to reproduce that in scale with quality, you need to establish a process. That's why you establish a process, is when you need to reach a scale and reproduce that reliably. The process is the what. When you establish the process is critical. If you do that early on, either in a startup or as the project is starting to be built in a larger company, if you come up with ossified projects and say, here's how we're going to do it, it may not end up well because you don't know if that's going to be the final shape. You don't know if that is your final product, right? So that's very true for startups, or especially true for startups. They don't necessarily have product market fit. They're experimenting. There are so many examples out there of startups that began as a product. They pivoted and pivoted and pivoted. And what we know today is not the product they began with, but it's something completely different, right? There are countless stories out there about this. So that when is one of the elements that makes such a difference in startups or larger companies. It also makes them very different from each other.
One of the questions that we sent you was about the management stream source. So tell us what that is.
Management is a craft. It's not an art, right? Art doesn't need a evaluation criteria, but a craft does. You paint a beautiful portrait. You don't have a criteria to say, oh, I'm going to give you an 8 or B plus on this. You don't do that with art. It speaks to each person, is abstract, and so on. But management is a craft. You do great management. There's a purpose on management. You have to execute effectively. Then you have to, from being effective, you have to be efficient and produce results. So there are ways to quantify good management. The source of that I'm referring to is learning about yourself, is learning about what are your limitations, what are your strengths, and what do you consider core values to establish a culture in your team and a company. For example, establishing a culture is something so important. No one should let a culture just emerge because it may be chaotic. People may not notice or may not know, but the CEO of the company established a culture from day one, right? It's something, it doesn't go unnoticed. Your culture in a company must be aligned with the culture, the overall culture of the company. But in every subgroup, there is room for you establishing the culture of that specific group, right? Different areas in a company, for example, sales and marketing and engineering and customer success, they all have their own subcultures, right? What are those that are important to you? By knowing what are your strengths, by knowing yourself, what culture can you establish? For example, you may say, let's build a new AI. Great. What should it have? Well, first you need to know what is the purpose of it's going to be. Is it going to be an AI for everything? That's a very hard problem. Let's narrow it down. Could be an AI to do medical diagnosis on X-rays. That narrows the problem a little bit, right? Okay, let's build that. Well, wait a second. We need to figure out how we're going to build it. You need to come up with a blueprint of the project first. And now you know what you're going to build, you can go to the implementation. Once you go into the implementation, something that must go together with it is the documentation. One, likely you're going to have new team members. You cannot stop all the engineers to educate and to teach all the new team members everything that has been done. But if you publish a body of documentation, people can on board, read that, and ask specific questions. Another thing to consider is, all right, we decided what to build, we did the blueprints, implemented, and wrote the documentation. Say, great, are we done? Of course not. You have to run tests. It has to be reliable and reproducible, the result. You cannot read one image and detect, oh, from this X-ray, it's a broken bone. And the next one, you read pretty much the same X-ray, and this is a muffin. It's like, oh, wait, there's something wrong over here. And last but not least, you have to keep monitoring that to see, are there outages? Are the results being consistent over time? Or what is the shape of that curve? So that's one way of establishing curves. The culture is define some of the elements that are non-negotiable. Let's say, even if this means delaying the release of a product, you may be under immense pressure and say, let's cut the tests and let's release the product. A core value is something you don't compromise. It's no, we're not gonna cut the tests. We're gonna delay the release of the product and we're gonna implement with tests. If you cut the tests, the consequences may be severe. You have a defective product out there. Coming back from that may mean the company or even the team inside of a company may cease to exist. So you can be penny wise and pound foolish. Mm-hmm. So it all comes from the reservoir, knowing your strengths, what to do, and establishing the culture of the team, for example.
Let's take a break in our discussion with Dalmo. Join us for part 3 of the discussion. For now, I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec.